We started this series explaining how the workflows of the 2030 vision, together with the challenge of protecting cloud infrastructure in the face of the changing threat landscape, mean that Zero Trust is the security architecture of choice. In this episode, we are looking at authorization and authorization policies. And since you've watched the previous episode, you know that everything starts with authentication, although we are not emphasizing that in this episode for the sake of brevity. Authorization is what it says on the box. Is something, such as access to a resource, authorized? Now, how do we determine that something has been authorized? That's where the authorization policy comes in. Authorization policies are called dynamic security policies in the NIST Zero Trust architecture, but we have chosen to call them authorization policies to avoid confusion with other more common uses of the term security policy, such as an organization's policies with respect to security. The authorization policy answers the question as to whether something is authorized. But how does it do that? The authorization policy is a statement that something is authorized when the conditions of the policy are met. These conditions would include some combination of the participant, for example, the user or the service, the activity that is authorized, for example, read an asset, the application or service that can be used, the infrastructure that can be used, for example, the storage where the asset is held, the time frame where the activity is authorized, and the assets involved in the activity. Authorization policies only permit activity. Zero Trust is denied by default, so there is no reason for an authorization policy to deny anything. The authorization policy answers the question as to whether something is authorized, and a component of the Zero Trust architecture, called a policy enforcement point, evaluates the authorization policy to determine whether an activity is authorized. The policy enforcement point can be viewed as guarding something and will only allow authorized activity to proceed. If an attempt to access something is not authorized by an authorization policy, it will be blocked by the policy enforcement point. Now, this doesn't mean that deploying Zero Trust requires populating your infrastructure with a new thing called a policy enforcement point. There are already components of the infrastructure that can perform that role. For example, the access controls on cloud storage can fulfill the role of a policy enforcement point. Those access controls might not understand authorization policies, but authorization policies can be used to set the access controls. Similarly, if a SaaS service supports the setting of access controls programmatically, an authorization policy can be used to set those access controls, which brings us to authorization rules. This is a pragmatic feature of the common security architecture for production, where an authorization policy is an abstract description of what is authorized. An authorization rule is an expression of an authorization policy in a manner specific to a particular piece of infrastructure. We introduced the authorization rule as a way of reducing the complexity of the policy enforcement point by not requiring it to interpret the abstract form. The goal of the authorization rule is to make the evaluation lightweight. An authorization policy might be used to authorize activity on two different cloud providers' infrastructures. That authorization policy will be turned into authorization rules specific to each of the cloud providers' infrastructure. Let's sum up where we are so far. An authenticated user is authorized by an authorization policy to have an interaction with an authenticated service. And there is no interaction unless it is authorized by a policy, because Zero Trust is denied by default. That's it for this episode in our series on production security and Zero Trust. If you have any questions or are interested in getting involved, please get in touch through our website, which is www.movielabs.com. Thank you for watching. If your company is ready to take the next step in implementing the Movie Labs 2030 vision, consider joining the growing global community of implementers who work directly with Movie Labs and its member studios in the Movie Labs Industry Forum. The forum offers you a seat at the table with key industry leaders worldwide who are committed to the 2030 vision and the future of media creation. The QR code on screen now is a link for more information. We hope you'll join us.